We've told ourselves a simple story about human progress, but the truth is more interesting. For a long time, we imagined our ancestors as primitive. We saw them stumbling slowly toward the modern world. But that story might be wrong. This video looks at 25 discoveries. They show early technology was astonishingly sophisticated. They force us to rewrite the history books. You'll get a new perspective on ancient ingenuity, on forgotten cultures. You'll start to see the past not as a stepping stone, but as a treasure chest. Full of brilliant, lost solutions. There's a 2,000-year-old device that predicted eclipses with clockwork precision. There's a simple clay jar that challenges the entire timeline of electrical power. By the end, you'll see their capabilities were far greater than we imagined. Their world had advanced engineering, profound scientific observation, innovations that still mystify us today. So what do you believe is possible for a civilization we've underestimated? They pulled this thing up from a shipwreck. It was just a corroded lump, green bronze, splintered wood. It sat in a museum for decades, a curiosity. Then one researcher looked closer. He saw traces of gear teeth, incredibly small, etched right into the decay. And that's when they realized this was no simple clock. This was a machine, so they used modern tools, X-rays, 3D scans, and inside that 2,000-year-old block, they found a miniature cosmos. Interlocking bronze gears, some were so tiny, so perfectly cut, they rival an 18th-century Swiss watch. But this device wasn't for telling the time of day. It was for telling the time of the heavens. You'd turn a hand crank, and with that, an ancient user could calculate the positions of the sun and the moon. Predict eclipses years in advance. It could even track the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games, a portable planetarium, an astronomical calculator. The ambition is breathtaking. The knowledge to build it to translate complex celestial cycles into precise mechanical ratios. That knowledge was thought to be lost. Lost until the Renaissance, but this one artifact, the Antikythera Mechanism, forces a humbling admission. Our timeline of human ingenuity is wrong. We often relegate that civilization to philosophy, to simple architecture, but they had engineers who thought in gears, in algorithms. They built a computer, and if a device this sophisticated could vanish from history, leaving just one waterlogged example, what else have we failed to find? That mechanical marvel isn't the only thing that seems to hold some old knowledge. There's a clay pot. It's in a museum in Baghdad. It's a simple thing, easy to pass by. Inside this pot, they found a copper cylinder, and inside that, an iron rod. The whole thing was sealed with asphalt. They put it back together, and they realized if you filled the jar with something acidic, vinegar, maybe grape juice, it would do something. It would produce a current, a small electric current. They call it the Baghdad Battery, and it's from about 200 years before the Common Era. For a long time, the story was that the first real battery was made by Alessandro Volta in 1800. But here was this object sitting in the dust, and it could make a spark over 2,000 years earlier. So what was it for? That's the question. Some think it could have been for electroplating. To put a thin layer of gold onto something like silver. They've tried it with copies. It works. You can picture someone, an artisan, using sour wine to gild a piece of jewelry. A chemical reaction they might not have understood, but they knew how to make it work. Other ideas say it could have been for healing, a mild tingling for therapy. Or maybe it was for a ritual. Its real use we might never know, but it's here, and that changes things. It means the spark of discovery, an actual spark, might have happened long before our histories say it did. If a culture had even a basic grasp of this, of a galvanic cell, what else did they know? What other small technologies just rusted away? This jar, this simple pot, it makes you look at ancient craft differently. That shine on an artifact might not just be from polishing, it might be from a science that's gone. The open sea under a thick, gray sky has no landmarks. For a Viking navigator heading toward Iceland, a cloudy day could mean drifting off course completely. Their stories mentioned a magical tool, a sunstone. It was thought to be just a legend, a metaphor, but history has a way of making myth real. In the wreck of an English ship from the late 16th century, they found a piece of crystal. It was Icelandic spar, a transparent calcite. To most people, it was just a rock. To a physicist, it was a potential key. This crystal has a property called birefringence. It splits light into two beams. You hold it up to the sky and rotate it, even through haze or fog, and the twin images in the crystal change in brightness. They only equalize when the stone is pointed directly at the hidden sun. It acts as a polarizing filter. It cuts through the glare of a clouded sky to find the sun's position. You could find west long after sunset, using the last polarization in the twilight. Experiments showed it works. A skilled user could find the sun within a few degrees, even when it was completely invisible behind the clouds. As researcher Guy Ropar said of a similar crystal, it could have been used as an accurate optical sun compass. This changes what we thought about their voyages. We assumed they stayed near coastlines, waiting for clear nights to steer by stars. But the sunstone means they could strike out across open ocean with confidence, no matter the weather. It was applied physics in the palm of a hand, a technological edge built not from metal, but from understanding light. It turns their legendary navigation from a tale of luck into one of sophisticated method. So what else have we mistaken for magic? If a crystal from a saga is real, then other tools from ancient texts, things described as fanciful or impossible, might be waiting for us. Waiting for us to understand the science behind the story. They weren't just guessing. They were engineering with the materials the world provided. A blade from that era could cut right through a rifle barrel. It could bend almost in half and snap back straight without a crack. The steel had this pattern, a shimmer like water flowing over it, and for centuries the way to make it was just gone. The knowledge disappeared in the 18th century. We thought it might be a good story. Maybe the special iron ore was used up, or maybe it was just clever marketing from a long time ago. But the answer, when we found it, was written at a scale you couldn't see. Modern researchers took slivers of these blades and looked at them under electron microscopes. They weren't just checking for impurities. They were looking at the structure, and what they found changed everything. Inside the metal were carbon nanotubes. These tiny, perfect cylinders of carbon, stronger than anything we know. And there were nanowires too, made of cementite, which is an incredibly hard compound. These things don't happen by accident. They come from a specific process, controlled and repeatable. The Smiths began with Wootz steel, ingots from India. They used a careful cycle of heating and hammering, and then a very slow, controlled cooling. That slow cooling let these nanostructures form. It aligned the carbon in the steel into these patterns. It was a recipe, a technological recipe built over generations of trial and observation. They didn't have a theory of nanotechnology. They didn't have electron microscopes. But through pure empirical skill, they were building materials at the molecular level 1,000 years ago. So Damascus steel wasn't about lost resources. It was about a lost technique. Those Smiths weren't just artisans. They were early materials scientists. They were manipulating matter in ways we only started to grasp in the 20th century. Their workshop was a lab. Their hammer blows were experiments, and the result was a material so advanced we're still figuring out how they did it, which makes you wonder about other lost arts. Roman concrete, for instance, or the vibrant dyes in ancient fabrics. If a sword can contain nanotechnology, what other invisible mastery is just sitting there, in objects we've looked at for centuries but never really seen. The principle of invisible mastery, it shows up again in a weapon that defined an empire. Byzantine accounts talk about a nightmare on the water. Their ships would send out this stream of liquid fire. It clung to whatever it touched. It burned on the sea itself. Water seemed to make it spread. For more than 700 years, this weapon, Greek fire, secured their naval dominance. It was a state secret, guarded so closely the exact formula died with the empire. For a long time, modern scholars thought of it as an early, crude napalm. But that idea is changing. The more you look, the more you see a system of terrifying complexity. It wasn't just a flammable liquid, it was a weapon system. The accounts describe it being projected from bronze tubes, like a primitive flamethrower, using a pressurized siphon pump. The fuel itself was probably a carefully refined concoction. Not just crude oil distilled to increase its potency, mixed with pine resin to make it sticky, and possibly quicklime, a substance that ignites on contact with water. That last ingredient would explain the reports that throwing water on the flames only made them worse. Think about the engineering challenge. Storing this volatile, self-igniting mixture in the hull of a wooden ship, you need a reliable pump and nozzle to project it under pressure in the heat of battle. On a rocking sea, and you need the chemical knowledge to refine and combine the ingredients consistently. This wasn't a lucky accident, it was applied chemistry. And mechanical engineering, it shows a deep, specialized understanding. Petroleum distillation, pyrotechnics, fluid dynamics. The existence of Greek fire shatters the idea. The idea that medieval warfare technology was simple. It points to a sophisticated, secretive arms race, where chemical and mechanical innovation were matters of national survival. And then it was gone. The knowledge was so compartmentalized, so protected, that when the empire fell, the technology vanished completely. It's a reminder of how fragile advanced knowledge can be. A system that dominated naval warfare for centuries can disappear, leaving behind only stories and a question. What other formulas have been lost? What other engineered solutions, just because the chain of guardians was broken? From the ground in Peru, the desert just looks like scratches. Like marks on a dry surface, but from the air that changes. You see huge shapes, a hummingbird, a spider that's over 150 feet long, a spiral. These are the Nazca Lines. For a long time, people thought they were religious, giant symbols for the gods, sacred graffiti. But then you have to ask, what if they were more than that? What if they were a kind of machine, not with gears, but a machine made of knowledge, built right into the ground? Maria Reich mapped these lines for decades. And she saw a pattern. A lot of the long, straight paths pointed right to where the sun would come up on the June solstice, and others lined up with stars. Important stars like the Pleiades, which told you when to plant. So her idea was this could be a calendar, an astronomical observatory, but built across the whole landscape. People still debate that. Some think the lines point to water or were for rituals, but just the fact of the lines makes you think about the technology involved. They were made between 500 BC and 500 AD by people who never saw them from above. No aerial view. They used ropes and stakes and geometry. To project a perfect spider onto a hillside, to keep a line straight for miles over rough ground, that takes surveying, that takes mathematics. It takes a shared plan carried out over generations. This wasn't doodling, this was large-scale engineering. The tools were simple, stakes and string, but the scale was huge. It shows a shared, sophisticated understanding of space, of measurement, of the cycles in the sky. A non-Western scientific achievement carved into the earth, so you have to see it differently. These aren't primitive drawings. They're a system for storing data. They encode knowledge about the environment where water is, when the seasons change into the shape of the land itself. It's a different kind of technology, A technology of alignment, of memory, of talking to the sky, and it makes you wonder what other ancient places, what we call ceremonial sites, might actually be like that. Silent computers, machines for reading the world, written not in code but in stone and earth. It's in Delhi, a metal pillar over 23 feet high. It's been there more than 1600 years, through monsoons, pollution, all that time, and it hasn't rusted. The surface is smooth. There's an inscription to a Gupta king from the 4th century. But it's not just an old monument. It's a kind of technological marvel, because we assume ancient iron just corrodes, that rust is inevitable. But this pillar is different. For a long time, people thought maybe it was some special alloy, something lost. Modern analysis showed something else, simpler, really. It's made of very pure wrought iron. But with high phosphorus and a specific forging technique, the smiths who made it used a process that formed a thin protective layer on the surface. A compound called mesawite. That layer acts as a shield. It stops oxygen and moisture from reaching the iron underneath, and it's self-repairing. This wasn't an accident. It was a perfected technology. These craftsmen, through trial and observation, understood how to manipulate the chemistry. They were making a form of stainless steel. Centuries before the term existed, and that challenges a narrative, the idea that corrosion resistance is a modern innovation, that progress is a straight line from primitive to advanced. But here's this physical rebuttal, 1600 years old. It shows that specific, advanced solutions could be developed in antiquity and then lost. Their principles forgotten, and then much later we might find the same solution again, through completely different means. Modern science gave it a name, mesawite. Ancient craft gave it a form, and it makes you wonder, what other structures right in front of us hold secrets to durability we haven't fully learned? Are there recipes in stone, in mortar, in metal that we've overlooked because we assumed we already knew better? The Pantheon's dome is a single mass of concrete. No reinforcement. It's been open to the sky for 2,000 years, through rain and frost, through the tremors of a city built on faults. Modern engineers look at it with disbelief. Our own concrete uses steel rebar, and it shows its age in decades. It spalls, it cracks, it succumbs to salt and stress. We always assumed the Roman version was simpler. A cruder recipe, just a fortunate accident of history, but that assumption is cracking. Geologists took core samples from Roman harbors, structures submerged in seawater for centuries. And they didn't find weakness, they found something else. The salt water had reacted with the concrete's ingredients. It triggered a slow growth, rare, plate-like minerals. One is called aluminous tobamorite, and these crystals don't just sit there. They grow into microscopic cracks, they fill them, they interlock, they make the material stronger over time. The concrete heals itself. The Romans had a specific formula. They mixed lime and volcanic ash. They called it pozzolana. For maritime structures, they often used seawater in the mix. They didn't understand the atomic scale chemistry. They couldn't see the self-assembling lattices, but through generations of experimentation, they perfected an empirical recipe. They observed what worked. They saw that structures built with this ash-lime blend, in contact with the sea, endured, and they turned that into a standardized technology. Across the empire, this is more than a historical footnote. It's a paradigm shift. We see a weak, primitive material. They engineered a living one, a responsive one. A material designed to thrive in the very conditions that destroy our own. It was sustainable construction, millennia before the term existed. They built for eternity. Not for the next fiscal quarter. Now, materials scientists are trying to reverse engineer this, to create modern concretes that can self-heal, that can sequester carbon. To build infrastructure that lasts centuries, not decades. The blueprint for that future isn't in a new lab compound. It's in a 2,000-year-old pier. It's in the silent proof that some of the most advanced solutions are behind us, waiting in the ruins. So what other ancient materials dismissed as simple might hold secrets like this? Is the true innovation not in creating something new, but in remembering what we forgot? That silent proof in Roman concrete, it shows a system that was perfected and spread. But sometimes the deepest evidence of technology is just one object, a single artifact, a puzzle with no key. In 1908, a man named Luigi Pernia was digging in a Minoan palace on Crete. His trowel hit something hard and round. He brushed the dirt away. It was a disc of fired clay about 6 inches across. On both sides, a spiral of tiny symbols ran from the edge to the center. Animals, people, plants, abstract marks. 45 distinct signs in total. The Phaistos disc. From the moment it was found, it was an anomaly. It didn't match any known script from the ancient world. It was made during the Minoan Bronze Age, sometime in the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, and it was utterly alone. For decades, scholars argued. Was it a fake, an elaborate hoax? Modern analysis settled that. The clay is authentic, and the symbols, they were stamped into the wet clay with individual seals before it was fired. That simple fact is the real revolution. Each of those 45 signs was its own little stamp. Someone, over 3,000 years ago, had created a set of movable type. They pressed these stamps into the clay in a sequence to form a message. Then they baked it. This is printing, not with ink on paper, but with pressure on clay. And it predates Johannes Gutenberg's printing press by more than 3,000 years. Think what that implies. It wasn't just writing. It was a system for reproducible writing. A technology for making multiple copies of the same text quickly. The idea was there, the execution was there, but then it just stops. We have only this one disk. No other examples, no other stamped texts from the entire Minoan civilization. It's as if the idea flashed into existence and then vanished. Maybe the system was a brief experiment. A prototype in a palace workshop, or a specialized technology for a specific purpose, an official decree, a religious text that was never widely adopted. Then, when the Minoan palaces fell, perhaps in the eruption of Thera or the upheavals that followed, the knowledge was lost, the stamps were melted down or scattered. The one baked clay proof was buried in the rubble. So the disk's mystery isn't just what it says. Its very existence is the message. It tells us that a concept we consider foundational to the modern world, the mechanized reproduction of information, was conceived in the Bronze Age. It was a technological road not taken, a brilliant detour on the path of history that led, for reasons we may never know, to a dead end. It challenges that comforting, linear story of progress. The story that says we moved from handwriting to block printing to movable type in a neat, inevitable sequence. The Phaistos disc says no, the sequence can be broken. Ideas can be found and then lost for millennia. It forces a humbling question. How many other seeds of invention have sprouted once in human history, only to be buried by time, waiting for someone to stumble upon them again? This clay disc is a fossil, not of a creature but of a thought about how to make words permanent and repeatable, and its silence is louder than any translation could be. The Phaistos disc is a fossil of a thought that vanished, but sometimes an idea isn't just recorded, it's celebrated. In the year 132, Common Era, at the Han Dynasty court, Zhang Heng presented something. A polymath, he showed a large bronze vessel, nearly 6 feet tall, ornate. Around its body, 8 dragons faced the 8 directions. Below each dragon, a bronze toad sat with its mouth open, waiting. He called it the Hufeng Didongye, the instrument for measuring the seasonal winds and the movements of the earth, and the histories say it did something impossible. It could sense an earthquake hundreds of miles away. For a long time, modern scholars dismissed that. They saw the dragons, the toads, the beauty. They thought it must be ceremonial. A symbolic object, maybe showing imperial power over nature. It was too elegant, too artistic to be a real scientific instrument. A second-century device detecting distant tremors that felt like legend. But then people started taking the description seriously. They tried to reverse engineer the principle. Inside that ornate urn, they realized, would have been a carefully balanced pendulum. A heavy mass suspended freely. When seismic waves arrived from a distant quake, waves too subtle for people to feel, that pendulum would swing, and it wouldn't swing randomly. The direction of the swing would point toward the quake's epicenter. The pendulum's motion would then trigger a mechanism, simple but brilliant. It would dislodge a bronze ball from the mouth of the dragon facing that direction. The ball would drop with a clang into the waiting mouth of the toad below. Think about that. This wasn't just a detector, it was an early warning system. One instrument in the capital could tell the emperor not just that the earth moved, but where. It gave actionable intelligence. Officials could dispatch aid or investigate in that specific region. It turned an invisible, terrifying force into a measurable, locatable event. That overturns a quiet assumption about ancient science. We picture stargazing, abstract philosophy. But here is a direct, practical application of mechanical physics to geophysics. Zhang Heng understood a principle, that energy travels in waves through the earth, and he built a machine to translate that principle into useful information. Centuries before such concepts were formalized in the West, the seismoscope wasn't about predicting quakes. It was about responding to them with knowledge instead of fear. Technology in service of public welfare, of state administration, a tool for governance born from observation and ingenuity. Its elegance wasn't a distraction. The beauty was part of its authority, a way to make a profound technological achievement legible to an entire court. So we're left with a question of legacy. If a device this sophisticated was built, used, and recorded in the 2nd century, what does that say about the technological landscape we've missed? It suggests that applied science, the kind that solves immediate human problems, has deep and global roots, roots that stay hidden until a careful reading of an old text or the clang of a bronze ball in a toad's mouth reminds us. Ingenuity has always had a practical side. A spark plug shouldn't be inside a stone, but in 1961, 3 collectors were out in the Coso Mountains in California looking for geodes. They cracked one open expecting crystals. Instead, they found this circular section of hard clay or rock, and inside it was a metal object. It had a ceramic collar, a central metal rod. It looked exactly like a 20th century spark plug. The problem was the geode. The collectors said the stone had formed around the object. If that was true, it would have taken hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions. The story exploded, an out-of-place artifact, an OOP art of the most dramatic kind, modern technology trapped in deep time. It seemed to point to a lost civilization or visitors from somewhere else. The human mind loves a pattern breaker, a story that upends everything. And this one promised that, but science asks the next question: what's the simplest explanation? Investigators like Pierre Stromberg took a closer look. They saw the object wasn't in a classic geode, which forms in volcanic rock. The matrix was a hard, clay-like nodule, the kind that can form around something man-made left in a mineral-rich environment. The spark plug itself was identified. A champion brand plug from the 1920s, common in early automobiles, Model T Fords. The likely scenario came clear. A spark plug was discarded or lost in those dry California hills decades earlier. Mineral-laden water percolated around it, depositing layers of hard pan clay and iron oxide, cementing it into a stone-like shell within a human lifetime, not a geological age. The mystery wasn't a message from the past, it was a lesson in context. This episode, even debunked, is important. It shows a tension at the heart of discovery. On one side, the leap toward the extraordinary, the desire for a story that rewrites history. on the other, the meticulous, often unglamorous work of establishing context. The Coso artifact forced archaeologists and geologists to articulate their methods more clearly. How do we date an object? It's not just the object, it's its relationship to everything around it. The soil layer it's in, the wear patterns, the chemical signatures, the artifact story is written by its environment, so this cautionary tale cuts both ways. It warns against rushing to assume a miraculous answer before exhausting the mundane ones, but it also warns against dismissing anomalies out of hand because they're inconvenient. Every paradigm-shifting discovery, from the Antikythera Mechanism to the Baghdad Battery, was once an anomaly. The difference is the investigation. The true process of overturning assumptions isn't about belief or disbelief. It's a disciplined, open-minded skepticism. You have to be willing to ask the wild question, but also ruthless enough to test it against every piece of evidence. The Coso story isn't a failure of curiosity. It's a masterclass in where curiosity has to go next, into the lab, into the field notes, into the humble, complicated truth. Because sometimes the most revolutionary discovery is understanding how easily we can fool ourselves and building a better method to see through the illusion. There's this wooden object in the Cairo Museum. It's in a glass case carved from sycamore wood, found in a tomb at Saqqara, placed there as a grave good, maybe 200 years before the Common Era. It's labeled as a model of a bird, and at first that's what it looks like. It has a beak, eyes, feathered markings, but then you look at the wings, they're perfectly straight. Not curved for flapping, the body is thick, cylindrical, and it has this vertical tail fin. No bird has that. It looks less like a falcon and more like a glider. Like a modern airplane, for a long time, Egyptologists saw it as a stylized bird, maybe a toy, an object with simple ritual meaning. It was filed away. A curiosity. Then, later, in the late 20th century, people who understood aerodynamics looked at it again. They built precise replicas, they tested them. And they found something. When you launch it by hand with a little upward tilt, it doesn't just fall, it glides smoothly, stably for a surprising distance. Its proportions, the center of gravity, the wing angle, they all align with basic principles of flight. It has inherent aerodynamic stability. It wants to fly. That ignited controversy. Some voices leaped to dramatic conclusions. Did ancient Egyptians understand flight? Did they witness something? Mainstream scholarship pushes back. There's no evidence, no text, no larger artifacts, no cultural memory of flight beyond myth. The likely explanation, they say, is still a stylized bird. A model of a falcon for religious purposes. Its flight capability is a coincidence, born from an artisan's eye for balanced, elegant form, but the artifact challenges that. Because the coincidence is too precise, it embodies principles humanity wouldn't formally understand for another 2,000 years, so we're left with a middle ground. Maybe it's more than a toy and less than a blueprint. It could be intuitive engineering, a craftsman through generations of observing birds, of carving wood, and seeing how shapes move through the air, unconsciously encoded observations about lift and stability. They may not have had the words center of gravity, dihedral angle, but their hands, guided by observation, found the form that worked, that blurs lines. Between art and science, between play and experiment, a child tossing a carved bird and watching it sail could be engaging in fundamental aeronautical testing. It forces us to expand our definition of ancient technology. It wasn't all gears and concrete. Sometimes it was the slow, accretive wisdom of the hand. The embodied knowledge of a shape that feels right because physically it is right. The Saqqara bird may not prove ancient pilots, but it proves something. That the human mind, in its drive to represent the world, often stumbles upon the underlying truths. The principles of flight were waiting in the air, in the observation of birds. And one day, a person with a piece of wood and a sharp tool came remarkably close to carving out that secret. It stands as a quiet monument, not to a lost aviation program, but to the dialogue between human creativity and the laws of physics. A dialogue where play is often the first draft of discovery. There's a book, no one can read it. The pages are vellum, old binding, but the words they're all unknown symbols, a script that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's called the Voynich Manuscript. Since it was found again in 1912, it's been this black hole for codebreakers, a cipher that just absorbs genius, and the drawings are just as strange. Plants that don't match any known botany, tubular systems like anatomy or maybe plumbing, circular diagrams with stars and zodiac signs, but they don't follow any known astronomy. For a long time, the comfortable assumption was that it had to be a forgery, a medieval hoax, nonsense text with fanciful pictures, a historical prank. That idea protected us from something more unsettling, the possibility that we're looking at a real system of knowledge we just can't reach. But the manuscript doesn't let itself be dismissed that easily. Carbon dating puts the vellum in the early 1400s, so it's not a modern fake, and when linguists and computer scientists run statistical analysis on the text, something remarkable shows up. The symbols aren't random, they follow complex patterns consistent with a structured, natural language. There's a grammar you can discern, a distribution of characters that mimics real linguistic rules. Words have internal structure, the text has entropy levels, that's a measure of information density, and they align with meaningful communication, not gibberish. That changes the whole puzzle. We're probably not looking at a hoax, we're looking at a cipher, or maybe a unique language, an entire system for encoding information, made with purpose and sophistication. The technology here isn't mechanical, it's informational, cryptographic. Someone or some group went to immense effort to record something in a way that would stay secret. Or maybe in a way only the initiated could understand. So what could it be? The theories are as many as the strange plants on its pages, an encrypted herbal preserving forbidden medical knowledge, an alchemical treatise hiding the steps to transformation, a document from a lost philosophical sect recording a worldview that the mainstream suppressed. Or maybe it's something else entirely, a constructed language for a specific field of study now extinct, a private notebook of observations so novel they had no existing words. The Voynich Manuscript is a profound technological challenge. It's a locked box of knowledge from 600 years ago, and our most advanced computational linguistics, our code-breaking algorithms, still haven't picked the lock. It stands as a monument to the limits of our understanding. We can date the materials, we can analyze the patterns, but the meaning, the content, the why, all of it stays stubbornly out of reach. This is a different kind of lost technology, not a rusted gear or a crumbled wall. It's lost information, a lost channel of communication. It forces a humbling admission. The past might contain entire domains of thought, entire schools of science or philosophy that are completely opaque to us now. Their libraries didn't burn. They're right here in plain sight. We just lost the key to the language. The manuscript whispers this question, tantalizing, frustrating. How much of history isn't in the artifacts we find, but in the ideas we can no longer hear? Workers were clearing jungle in Costa Rica back in the 1930s for a banana plantation, and they found something, not a building, dozens of huge stone spheres. Perfectly round, some were taller than a person, others were like large boulders. They looked like they'd grown right out of the ground. Hundreds have been found since. They're called the stone spheres of the Diquis, and that shape, that simple round shape, asks a hard question. How do you make a perfect sphere 2 meters wide with nothing but stone tools? People first thought they were symbolic, territory markers, objects for rituals. They were found near old settlements, sometimes in lines that fit. but symbolism doesn't explain how they were made. The roundness is its precise. Modern measurements show many are within centimeters of being a perfect sphere. The surfaces are polished smooth, sometimes to a shine. The stone is granodiorite. It's hard, not something you just carve, so there was a method. Researchers like John Hoops, they've worked it out. It started with finding the right boulder. Then they used controlled fracture. You'd build fires against the stone, heat it up, then cool it fast with water. That creates weak points. Then you peck at it. You use harder rocks to knock off big flakes. That's the rough shape, but the real work came after, the grinding. They used abrasives, sand, probably with water. And they would grind and polish for generations maybe, a relentless process of wearing the stone down, from a lumpy form into that perfect curve, the patience that took. The consistency to remove material evenly from all sides, to not create a flat spot. That's precision engineering on a huge scale, done with nothing but human perseverance. It shows a mastery of shaping stone lithic reduction that matches anything from the ancient world, but it also points to something else, an understanding of geometry. To hold the idea of a sphere in your mind, and to make that idea real in a multi-ton stone that requires a sense of form, of volume, of symmetry. It's a mathematical concept made physical. These spheres make you rethink what technology means. It isn't just metal tools or complex machines. Here, the technology was in the technique, in knowledge passed down. Knowledge of how stone behaves with heat, with impact, with friction. A society spent immense resources over years to make these. They weren't tools. They weren't weapons, they were expressions of an idea made solid. It changes the view of pre-Columbian Central America. This wasn't just simple villages. These were cultures that could coordinate long-term projects that demanded a deep, practical science. The spheres are proof of what a society can do when it focuses its skill on a vision of perfection. They sit there in the jungle clearings, not as mysterious relics, but as durable proof that advanced technology can have the simplest shape, a perfect sphere. Just waiting there for us to see the genius it took to make it round. Deep in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, there's a stone carving. A modern person looking at it might be startled. It shows this large, elongated object, shaped almost like a glass bulb. Inside it, there's a snake stretching the whole length. A figure is holding the snake. And what looks like a cable runs from the base of the bulb to a box. To a modern eye, it looks exactly like an ancient drawing of an electric light, the Dendera light. That image has fueled a theory, a persistent one. The idea that this could be a record of lost electrical technology in ancient Egypt. It's a seductive idea. It offers a simple answer. How did they paint those deep tombs without shadows? How did they get such precision without a strong, portable light? The light bulb theory gives you a neat technological solution. But archaeology works with evidence, and the evidence points somewhere else. Egyptologists have a clear reading. The relief is a symbolic scene from creation mythology. The bulb is a giant lotus flower, the primordial mound where life began. The snake is the god Harsomptus, the life force being born from that flower. The cable is a stylized lotus stem. The box is a jed pillar, a symbol of stability. It's not an electrical diagram, it's a theological one. So why does the modern interpretation hold on so tightly? It speaks to a deep desire, a desire to see our own technological reflection in the distant past, to close the gap between them and us by putting our tools in their hands. When we see a strange symbol, our first instinct is to match it to something familiar. A light bulb is familiar. A creation myth about a snake born from a lotus is not. The theory, though scholars reject it, is a perfect case study. It shows how perspective shapes interpretation. We project our world onto theirs, but inside this misreading there's a real question. One Egyptologists actually work with: how did ancient artists depict concepts they had no direct visual reference for? How do you draw the moment of creation? The emergence of a god, the answer is symbolism, a visual language. The lotus flower wasn't chosen because it looked like a light bulb. It was chosen because of its daily cycle. Rising from murky water to bloom in the sun, that was a perfect metaphor for birth, for renewal, for divine manifestation. The snake shedding its skin was a symbol of regeneration. Cyclical power: the artists weren't documenting technology, they were encoding philosophy. The Dendera relief is a test. It tests our ability to listen to the past on its own terms. To accept that their brilliance might be expressed in metaphor, not in blueprints for our gadgets. Their technological achievements were real. The precise stone cutting, the monumental architecture, the chemistry of pigments that last for millennia. But those achievements existed inside their own cultural framework. To reduce a rich mythological scene to a schematic for a light bulb misses the point. It trades their sophisticated worldview for a simpler, anachronistic one. The real lesson of the Dendera light isn't about electricity, it's about humility. It reminds us the past is not a mirror, it's a conversation, and to understand it, you have to learn its language. A couple was walking near London, Texas. This was back in 1936. They saw a piece of rock and there was wood sticking out of it. They cracked the rock open. Inside was a hammer. A complete tool, an iron head on a wooden handle. The rock around it looked hard. It looked ancient, and that's where the mystery started. Early reports said the rock was from the Cretaceous period. The age of dinosaurs, the implication was huge. A human-made tool inside stone over 100 million years old. It looked like the ultimate anachronism. Proof of impossible timelines, a modern object in a prehistoric world. The story captured people. It was used as evidence for lost civilizations, or even visitors from somewhere else. A hammer from a time before humans, but science asks for the full picture. Not just the dramatic artifact. Geologists looked at the context. The rock wasn't a solid, ancient bedrock layer. It was a concretion, a hard, mineralized shell. It can form around any object, a shell, a bone, a tool. If it's lying in mineral-rich water, that process isn't slow geologic time. It can happen in centuries, even decades. The hammer was probably lost by a miner or a settler in the 1800s. The local water, rich in dissolved minerals, slowly deposited layers. Limestone, iron oxide, other materials. It cemented the hammer into a convincing stone casing, and that could have happened within a human lifetime. The hammer itself tells a story. Its design is clearly 19th century American. The shape of the head, the way the handle is wedged in. It's a common tool from that era, not a relic of deep time. So the London hammer isn't evidence of ancient advanced technology, but its story isn't worthless. In fact, it's a cornerstone case study in archaeological methodology. It shows a fundamental principle. The age of an object isn't determined by what's encasing it. It's determined by the undisturbed geological layer it's found within. An object out of place in a concretion is just an object out of place. To claim an ancient origin, you need an undisturbed context. You need the object to be sealed in a datable stratum, with clear relationships to other materials from that same time. The London hammer had none of that. It was a solitary find in a concretion, no connection to a verifiable ancient layer. This story teaches a critical lesson. In scientific discipline, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that evidence has to include a verifiable, undisturbed context. A single strange object isn't enough. It could be a hoax, a loss, a mistake. The standard of context is what protects the integrity of historical inquiry. It's the filter. It separates coincidence from discovery. It forces researchers to look beyond the artifact, to look at the story of the dirt around it. The London hammer isn't a failure of a mystery. It's a masterclass in how to solve one. It reminds us that the most important tool in archaeology isn't a trowel or a brush. It's a rigorous, patient skepticism that asks not just what you found, but how and where and why it got there. A shepherd noticed something on a hill in southeastern Turkey. It was a shape, a mound that felt different. When archaeologists started digging in the 1990s, they found pillars, huge T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in circles. Carved with animals, foxes, cranes, boars, scorpions, the artistry was stunning, the scale was monumental, and then they got the date, radiocarbon from the base material. 9,600 years before the Common Era, that's 11,500 years ago, a time we call the Late Stone Age, a time of hunter-gatherers. This is Göbekli Tepe, and it doesn't just add to history, it tears up the table of contents. For over a century, the story had a sequence. First, farming. Agriculture created surplus. Surplus let people settle into villages. With settlement came specialization, social hierarchy, free time for religion and art. Only then, with that complex society, could you build monuments. Stonehenge, the pyramids, products of farming states. It was a tidy story. Göbekli Tepe stands that story on its head. This is a site of staggering ambition, built by people who should have been roaming in small bands, hunting gazelle, gathering plants. They had no pottery. No metal, no domesticated animals or crops, yet they quarried multi-ton limestone blocks. They shaped them with stone tools into precise forms. They carved them with elaborate art. Then they transported these pillars, some over 10 tons, and erected them into circles. This wasn't a village, this was a cathedral, built not by a farming state, but by a society we thought was incapable of it. The technology is simple and profound. The tools were Neolithic, flint scrapers, hammerstones, but the knowledge wasn't primitive. Quarrying large blocks means understanding fracture lines in rock. Shaping them demands a sense of geometry. Transporting them required log rollers, plant fiber ropes, the coordinated labor of hundreds. Erecting them was a feat of engineering. Levers, ramps, brute strength, and planning. This forces a rethink. Maybe the drive to build something grand for a spiritual purpose came first. Maybe that drive brought people together in large numbers, season after season, to work. That sustained cooperation could have created a need for more reliable food. It could have spurred the management of wild grasses, the corralling of animals. The temple might have invented the farm. The social revolution may have triggered the agricultural one. Technology here isn't just about tools, it's about social technology. Organizing human effort toward a shared vision. Göbekli Tepe suggests our capacity for complex collaboration, for turning a shared idea into reality, is far older than we thought. It was there, waiting in the human mind, long before the first seed was sown. There's a copper coin, found at a Native American settlement in Maine, worn smooth. On one side, there's a stylized animal, maybe a lion, maybe a wolf. On the other side, a cross and a king's name, Olaf Kyrre. He ruled Norway from 1067 to 1093. So it's a Norse penny, Viking Age currency, but it wasn't found in Scandinavia. It was found in North America, hundreds of miles south of the only confirmed Viking site, Elance Orks Meadows in Newfoundland. For a long time, the story was either-or. Either the Norse had permanent colonies here, or they barely touched the shore. This coin, it challenges that. It's not proof of a Norse village in Maine. No longhouses were found, no tools, no other definitive artifacts, but its presence is evidence of contact. The question is how. The most plausible answer is trade. There was a vast, pre-existing indigenous exchange network. Across the continent, goods traveled. Ideas, materials, a Norse object may be acquired through direct trade in the north, could have been passed hand to hand, community to community, over generations. It could have journeyed south as a curiosity, a piece of exotic material, a talisman, its value shifting from monetary to symbolic as it moved. That overturns a quiet assumption. That the Atlantic was an absolute barrier before Columbus, that the ancient Americas were isolated. The main penny suggests something more interconnected. It shows the technology of exploration wasn't just ships, though the Norse Na was a marvel. It was also the social technology of connection, the human impulse to trade. To gift, to share the strange and the new. Objects carry more than themselves. This coin carried the idea of its origin. The image of a cross could have sparked questions. The concept of struck currency, of standardized value, might have been discussed. We don't know what stories were told about it, but its journey shows the transfer of materials often meant the transfer of knowledge. However fragmented, so this humble penny is a testament to a different kind of map, not a map of empires or settlements, a map of possibilities drawn by countless individual interactions. Across water and land, it hints at a world where a piece of copper from a Norwegian mint could end up in the hands of a Wabanaki hunter-gatherer centuries ago. It reminds us that history is rarely about hard walls. It's about porous borders, about the quiet, relentless currents of exchange that have always connected people. Long before we called it globalization, a story can be a powerful technology. There's a tale that started going around in the late 60s. It was about a Chinese archaeologist, Kai Pu-te. And the story said that back in 1938, he found some caves. These were in the Bayan Ha Mountains, a remote area. Inside the caves, he found hundreds of stone discs. Each one had a hole in the center, and each one had a spiral of tiny hieroglyphics carved into it, a script no one knew. The story claimed that decades later, when this script was finally translated, it told an astonishing story. It said there was a people called the Dropa. Their spacecraft had crashed in those mountains long ago. They were stranded here, and these stone discs were their recorded history. This story spread. It was in popular magazines, books about ancient astronauts. It was compelling. It fit a pattern, a mysterious artifact, a forbidden translation, a hidden truth about our past. But there was a problem. No credible evidence ever surfaced. There's no scholar named Kai Pu-te in the archaeological records from that time. No museum has ever displayed these discs. No peer-reviewed journal has ever published a translation. The photographs that went around were later identified as other things, unrelated artifacts or modern creations. The whole narrative is a fabrication, a modern myth born from that mid-century fascination with extraterrestrial visitors, but its persistence is a kind of discovery. The Dropa stones were never an archaeological find. They became a cultural artifact. They reveal a desire, a human desire for a past that's more wondrous, more connected to cosmic mysteries than what archaeology usually gives us. The gradual, earthy record, they show how a compelling narrative can bypass evidence, especially one that promises to rewrite everything. It can just lodge itself in the public imagination. This legend is a critical case study. It shows why the methods of historical inquiry aren't bureaucratic obstacles. They're essential tools. Provenance, that's the documented history of an object's discovery and ownership. Peer review, that's the scrutiny by independent experts. Scientific analysis, dating, material composition, context, these are non-negotiable protocols. They're like an immune system for discovery, designed to separate signal from noise, fact from folklore. The Dropa story didn't overturn an assumption. It exploited one. It exploited the assumption that mainstream science is hiding the truth, that real breakthroughs come from outside the system. But every genuine discovery, like the Antikythera Mechanism or Göbekli Tepe, followed the opposite path. It came from within that system of rigorous questioning. It endured the scrutiny. These stones that never existed teach a lesson. the work of rewriting history is slow. It's built on fragments of pottery, on stratigraphy, on corroded metal and cracked stone. It's built on evidence you can touch, evidence you can measure and debate. The most revolutionary truths aren't the ones that arrive in a perfect story, fully formed. They're the ones that emerge piece by patient piece from the dirt. The desire for a past more wondrous than the record, it gets answered by something solid, something that rang. There was a missionary, William Colenso, in New Zealand in 1836. He was traveling the North Island, staying with a Maori community, and he saw they were using this broken piece of metal as a pot for cooking potatoes. It was a bell, a heavy cast bronze bell. He cleaned it off and saw markings, inscriptions in a script he didn't know. He acquired it, sent it to scholars. The translation was a shock. The writing was Tamil, a language from southern India. It was a prayer, dated to the Mughal era, likely between the 16th and 18th centuries. So a bell from a Tamil Hindu temple, or maybe a Tamil trading ship, found in New Zealand, in the hands of a Polynesian people, centuries before Captain Cook. How did it get there? The most compelling answer is a shipwreck. A vessel from the Indian Ocean world, a Tamil merchant ship, or an Arab dhow with Tamil crew caught in a storm. Driven far off course east across the Pacific, until it foundered on the shores of New Zealand, the bell survived. It was found by Maori, for whom metal was rare and valuable. They repurposed it. Its original meaning was lost, but its utility was clear. It became part of their story. This one object, the Tamil bell, it challenges a deep-seated map. The map that says Oceania was a closed loop, that Polynesian voyagers moved within the Pacific, and the great trade networks of the Indian Ocean stayed west. This bell says the currents were more connected. It speaks to the maritime technology of those Indian Ocean traders. Their ships, the Tamil Thoni or the Arab dhow, they were masterpieces of wooden shipbuilding. Built for the monsoon winds, capable of voyages lasting months, their navigators used stars, ocean swells, bird flight paths, a whole science of the sea. We know they reached Southeast Asia, China, East Africa. This bell suggests some of these ships, whether by intent or disaster, went further, much further. Into the heart of the Pacific. It's a reminder. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Just because we don't have a written log of a Tamil captain landing in New Zealand doesn't mean it never happened. History is written by the survivors, by the record keepers. A ship that wrecked on an unknown shore left no chronicle. It left only what the waves didn't take. A broken bell used to cook food, waiting for someone to ask where it came from. This artifact turns isolation into a question of perspective. From a European viewpoint, New Zealand was the last major landmass discovered. From a Polynesian viewpoint, it was the homeland reached by navigators centuries earlier. And from the viewpoint of this bell, New Zealand was a possible, if distant, point in a web that spanned half the globe. The map of ancient human movement isn't finished. It's being redrawn, one unexpected, resonant object at a time. The bell traveled across oceans. That's one kind of unexpected voyage. But there's an artifact that didn't just travel. It seems to have arrived centuries too soon. In the Toluca Valley of Mexico, at a site called Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca, archaeologists in the 1930s found a burial. Inside was a small terracotta head. Its style was jarring. The beard, the hairstyle, the features, they looked Roman, not Mesoamerican. The burial layer itself was dated to before Columbus, somewhere between the 9th and 13th centuries. If it's authentic, that's a historical earthquake, a Roman artifact in pre-Columbian Mexico that implies a transoceanic connection. It would rewrite every textbook. The immediate explanation, the cautious one, is intrusion. Maybe the head was a colonial-era object, something from later. Maybe it worked its way down into an older layer. A careless dig, a disturbed context, that's the null hypothesis in archaeology. It's a vital one. It protects the timeline until extraordinary evidence proves otherwise. But the head wasn't dismissed so easily. In the 1990s, researchers used thermoluminescence dating that measures when the clay was last fired. The results came back. They suggested an origin date between the 9th century BCE and the 13th century CE. That range is broad, but its upper end aligns with the Roman era. Its lower end fits the burial date. It didn't prove antiquity conclusively, but it made the case for more scrutiny. This ongoing debate isn't a failure of science. It's science in action. The Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca head shows the process, the meticulous, contentious process that greets any find that challenges the paradigm. It shows that the academic world does engage with anomalies. It subjects them to the latest tests. It argues over provenance, over style, over context. The head has been called a hoax, a misidentified colonial saint figurine, and by a few, potential evidence of contact. That spectrum of opinion is healthy. It means the artifact is being taken seriously enough to fight over. Whether this specific head is ever verified or finally debunked is almost secondary. To its function, it acts as a probe. It tests the flexibility of our historical models. It forces historians to articulate their standards of evidence with clarity, and it demands they remain open, however cautiously, to revising deep-seated narratives of global isolation. The process is the point. The relentless questioning, applying new technologies to old puzzles, the willingness to follow evidence into uncomfortable territory. That's how assumptions are genuinely overturned. Not by a single dramatic revelation, but through a sustained, rigorous conversation between an artifact and every tool, every theory we can bring to bear on it. The head's true value may not lie in the answer it provides, but in the profound question it keeps alive. The stones had these impossible scenes on them. A man riding a triceratops like it was a horse. Surgeons doing what looked like a heart transplant with these intricate tools, astronomers looking through telescopes. These were the Ica stones. They came out in the 1960s. A Peruvian farmer named Basilio Ashuya was selling them. He said he'd found them in a cave. That they were ancient artifacts from a lost civilization. A civilization that knew dinosaurs, that had mastered modern medicine. It was a story built for sensation. It suggested a history so different it would make every textbook obsolete. The images were compelling. They went viral before the internet existed. They sparked books, documentaries, asking if everything we knew was wrong. But the stones had a flaw you could feel with your fingertip. Scientific examination showed the engraved lines were sharp. They were fresh. They didn't have the patina, the weathered erosion that centuries in the ground would create. The tools used were modern metal implements, not ancient ones, and the images themselves were a pastiche, lifted from popular dinosaur books and medical illustrations of the time. Faced with the evidence, Basilio Ashuya eventually admitted it. He said he had engraved the stones himself. He used a dental drill. The entire collection was a modern creation. A forgery made for a market that was eager to buy a more exciting past. So the story of the Ica stones isn't a historical mystery. It's a lesson in why methodology matters. It shows how a compelling narrative paired with physical objects can bypass critical thinking. It can capture the imagination, and the stones were profitable. They fueled a whole niche of pseudo-archaeology. It distracted from the genuine, documented wonders of Peruvian cultures, the Nazca, the Inca. Their legacy is a cautionary tale. It underscores the role of skepticism, the established protocols of archaeology, provenance, peer review, material analysis. They act as a filter. That filter isn't meant to suppress wonder. It's to protect it, to make sure the real discoveries get the space they deserve. the authentic things, the Antikythera mechanisms, the Göbekli Tepe. The stones remind us the desire to rewrite history is powerful, and sometimes that desire is exploited. The true work of overturning assumptions isn't about accepting the most astonishing story. It's about having the discipline to demand the evidence, the verifiable evidence. The Ica stones were a fabrication, a story told for profit, but some of the deepest truths about our past, they aren't carved in stone. They're written in us, in our cells. For a long time, the story was clean. Modern humans evolved in Africa. Then they marched out around 60,000 years ago. Replacing all the others, the Neanderthals, it was a story of superiority, simple replacement. Then, in a cold Siberian cave, Denisova scientists found a fragment of bone. A finger bone from a young person, too small to tell much by looking, but they sequenced the DNA, and the whole narrative fractured. This wasn't a Neanderthal. It wasn't a modern human, it was a new branch, an entirely unknown branch of the human family. The Denisovans, we'd never seen their tools, no clear picture of their faces. But here they were, speaking through genetics, and their message rewrote the rules of early technology. The data showed something. Modern humans didn't just replace Denisovans. We met them, we lived alongside them in Asia for millennia, and we interbred. Today, people in Melanesia, East Asia, especially Tibet, they carry pieces of Denisovan DNA. It's not just a note. That DNA is active, it's functional. Researchers found a gene variant, EPAS1, almost identical to the Denisovan version, incredibly common in Tibetan populations. And it does something. It lets the body use oxygen far more efficiently at high altitudes. It's a biological adaptation for survival in the thin air of the Himalayan plateau. And it came directly from the Denisovans. Think about that. This isn't a chance encounter. It's deep, sustained interaction. The Denisovans weren't just another group. They were masters of an extreme environment. For this gene to be so beneficial, to be passed on and preserved, it means they must have been thriving in the high-altitude regions of Asia. For a very, very long time, to thrive there requires more than a lucky gene. It implies a whole suite of knowledge, a technology for survival, strategies for hunting in that landscape. Knowledge of medicinal plants that grow there, techniques for shelter, for clothing, for navigating the cold and the low oxygen, a complex cultural toolkit honed over generations. All of it is lost to the archaeological record, but its signature is etched into the biology of living people. This genetic legacy overturns the old model. Completely, the story of early humanity isn't a simple march, it's a mosaic. A tapestry of meetings, exchanges, mergers between different kinds of people. Technology and knowledge, they didn't travel one way from advanced to primitive. They were shared, they were traded, they were inherited in the most intimate way possible. A Denisovan individual sharing a fire with a Homo sapiens group, they might have passed on more than warmth. They might have passed on the knowledge of how to survive the next mountain winter. And that knowledge in its most essential form became part of us. So the most sophisticated technology we've found from these distant cousins, it isn't a spear point. It isn't a carved bead, it's a biological innovation, a piece of code for living on the roof of the world. It forces us to expand our definition, technology beyond objects. Survival itself, encoded in culture and biology, that's the ultimate tool. The Denisovans remind us, history isn't only in the things we dig up, it's in the breath we take. In the way our bodies meet a challenge, their silent genetic gift, it's a testament to a past far more interconnected, far more collaborative than we ever imagined. That genetic story is in the code, not in stone, but sometimes the stone is the question. Off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan, divers found something, massive platforms. Sharp 90-degree angles, staircases, wide, flat plazas, all of it under 80 feet of water. The scale is huge. It goes on for hundreds of feet. It looks at first like a sunken city, a city lost when the seas rose after the last ice age that started a debate. It's still going. Geologists are on one side. They point to the bedrock. It's sandstone. Sandstone fractures in straight lines in flat plains from tectonic stress. The currents there are strong. They could have eroded the stone along those natural cracks, made what looks like carved steps, made those platforms. The whole thing, they say, could be natural. A geological masterpiece. On the other side, some archaeologists see details. They see what look like tool marks on some surfaces. They point to two tall, pillar-like stones close together that seem aligned. They see all these right angles, all these symmetrical tiers in one place. That, to them, stretches what chance could do. Yonaguni is on a frontier. It pushes underwater archaeology. It pushes geology. If it's all natural, it's a lesson in how rock can mimic human work. It makes scientists ask, how do you tell a wave-cut platform from a leveled floor? The debate sharpens the tools. But if any part of it is human-made, the meaning changes. It would mean monumental building around 10,000 years BCE. That's a time when, by the old models, people there were hunter-gatherers. It would mean a society doing large-scale stonework, possibly before agriculture as we know it. It would reshape Pacific prehistory, suggest complexity earlier on land that's now underwater. New tools are key: sonar mapping, 3D photogrammetry. They let researchers study the site in detail without the water's distortion. They're building a digital twin to analyze the geometry with pure math. So Yonaguni is more than a puzzle. It's a shift in how we look. We're not just looking on dry land anymore. When the ice melted, sea levels rose, vast coastal plains vanished. The continental shelf was once home to generations. If complex societies were there, their monuments might not be on our maps. There under the waves, Yonaguni, natural or not, challenges an assumption. The assumption that all the big stages of human culture happened on the land we stand on now. It opens a door to a submerged world, a frontier, where every strange angle on the seafloor asks a question. How deep does our history go? The dialogue with nature is written in our oldest seeds. We think of farming as a single breakthrough. That moment someone planted the first seed in the Fertile Crescent, and the idea spread like a wave. But the story from ancient DNA is more interesting. It's a story of multiple beginnings, parallel invention. Take barley. For generations, textbooks said it came from the Near East, part of that Neolithic package, crops and animals that spread together as a single technology. Then scientists started extracting genetic material from ancient barley seeds found far outside that region, in Tibet, in Central Asia, and the DNA told a different story. The barley grown in these distant places wasn't a descendant of Fertile Crescent strains. It was its own lineage, domesticated independently from local wild grasses. So different groups of people, separated by vast mountains and deserts, all looked at the same wild plant and had the same revolutionary thought, and then they made it happen. Agriculture wasn't a single invention that spread. It was a convergent technology, an idea whose time had come in multiple places at once. This pattern of independent discovery changes our view of early intelligence. It wasn't about one clever culture passing knowledge to others. It was about human minds everywhere observing, experimenting, slowly bending nature to a new purpose. The technology was a process, a slow, deliberate conversation with a plant. Nowhere is that conversation more clear than with maize. We know it came from a wild grass called teosinte. A plant with tiny, hard kernels, almost inedible. The transformation into the fat, sweet corn we know seems miraculous. Genetic archaeology has mapped that miracle step by step. It wasn't a quick discovery. It was a project that spanned millennia. generation after generation of early Mesoamericans selectively saving seeds from plants with slightly larger ears, with kernels that clung less tightly, with more starch. They weren't just cultivating a crop, they were, in effect, reprogramming its genetic code through artificial selection. They understood heredity in practice long before they had the theory. They knew the traits of the parent plant could appear in its offspring. This was applied genetics on a grand, centuries-long scale. The tool making this history visible is a technology in itself. Bioarchaeology, the ability to read the degraded DNA from a tiny, charred seed found in a hearth. This lets us trace lineages back through time. It shows the false starts, the dead ends, the surprising exchanges between regions. It reveals agriculture not as a sudden revolution, but as a diffuse, experimental process of co-evolution. Humans changed the plants, and the changing plants, in turn, changed human society. They enabled settlements, specialization, new forms of social structure. This final discovery brings the journey full circle. We began with complex machines and ended with the simplest act, planting a seed. But both represent a profound technological leap. The early farmers were engineers of life itself. Their laboratory was the field. Their blueprint was written in the living tissue of the plants they tended. Their legacy isn't just in the food we eat, but in the demonstration that the most transformative technology is often a patient, collaborative dialogue. A partnership with the natural world, built on observation, experimentation, and a quiet, persistent genius that rewrote the rules of how humans live. The Antikythera Mechanism, with its intricate gears, Roman concrete that heals itself, these 25 discoveries, they're sketching a new portrait of early technology. A picture defined by diversity, by ingenuity, and by a level of sophistication we're just starting to measure. Together, they dismantle an old story. A comforting story, the story of a linear march from primitive to advanced. That story is gone. In its place, we see a complex tapestry, woven with brilliant innovation. And tragic loss and patient rediscovery. Each artifact, from the Baghdad Battery to the Denisovan gene, is a puzzle piece. It doesn't fit the old map. It forces us to redraw the entire landscape of human capability. The past isn't a foreign country of simple beings. It's a vast repository, a library of sophisticated solutions. Written in gears, in genetic code, in the silent alignment of stone, we're only now, with modern tools, beginning to read its pages. Let this journey inspire more than wonder. Let it inspire a deep humility and a relentless curiosity. The next great discovery, the one that overturns everything, could be waiting. It might be sitting in a museum basement, mislabeled as a toy. It could be in the lines of an undeciphered manuscript, or in the genetic memory of a high-altitude plant. The quest to understand our past is never over. It's an ongoing conversation across millennia, where every new voice from the ruins asks us to listen more carefully and to imagine more boldly.